Here we are back in the Dog app application. I've closed the windows and cleaned up Solution Explorer a little bit, just collapsed folders and so forth. So we've got all the application infrastructure built. So we're finally ready to build the view component. But before I get into building the view component for dogs, I want to explore a little bit more about using view components. All right, and even before that, I want to go ahead and rebuild the solution just to make sure that everything is still compiling and it's working okay. So it starts compiling, and we do have some errors. Okay. Name type or namespace definition or end of file expected. Okay. 2 different lines. Okay. Looks like that's a artifact of my pasting code in. So if I put the cursor after that, I can come up here, and I'm not seeing the opening bracket, but I'm kind of guessing that I just have an extra bracket here. So that's what it certainly looks like. And if I do Control KD again too, yeah, okay. I ended up with 2 extra brackets. How does that look? So now when I highlight that one, it highlights that one. Okay. That looks better. Save early and save often. Rebuild the solution again. Okay, and it compiles and all is well again with the world. All right, so once again, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a folder for view components. This application only has one, but it's a good convention to put all of your view components together. So I'll right-click, add new folder, and I'll give it the clever name View Components. And I'll right-click on this and add my class for the dog view component. Whoops. Right-click on it and add. Now, unfortunately, if I select New Item, you won't find any template here for a view component. There isn't a template. It'd be kind of nice if Microsoft included that. Not that the code for a component is all that different, but I just need to add a class. There's just no template there for it. And I'm going to name this the Dogs View Component. Now keep in mind, I don't need to name the class itself. This is the name of the file, but I can change the name of the class to not include view component as long as I use one of those other techniques for identifying that it's a view component. But with file names, I like to identify what it contains, so that's a lot more descriptive for the application. All right, take a second to do that, and now we have a generic class, and we can start building our view component. Now, for this part of the exercise, the name here is a little bit misleading. This view component is not going to have anything to do with dogs, the first iteration of it, because again, I want to show you a few things about using view components. But then, later, I'll morph it into something that definitely has something to do with dogs. Okay, so first thing I need to do is inherit from view component. So this is redundant. I'll hit, even though it's a view component that I want. I hover over this and select it. I can come over here to Quick Actions, and I need to add the Microsoft.ASP NetCore MVC because that's implemented as part of MVC within ASP.NET Core. Okay, and then I need to add a method, and it needs to be the invoke async. I'll do Control D again, and this needs to be a public method. It's asynchronous. So I'm going to return task. And in this case, it's going to be an iViewComponent result. So remember I talked about this earlier, that there's a couple different sort of things that you can return. Most commonly, you're going to return an iViewComponent result because then you hook into the view support of view components. And this is all available because I'm inheriting from the view component object. Okay, name of the method is invoke async. And for this simple example, I just want to return view. All right, so this should look suspiciously like a controller because, again, view components act an awful lot like controllers. Okay, that was an embarrassing mistake. I'll fix that because it's public and that causes everything else to go away. Okay, we have the green squiggly there. It has to do because it's not seeing any use of the await operator. That's fine in this particular example. When we flesh out our full dog's view component, it will use await, and that squiggly will go away. It's going to compile just fine. It's just a warning. Pay attention to warnings, though. Okay, so that's the first iteration of the view component. Next thing I need to do is add the view. So this view is going to apply to all view components across all controllers throughout the entire application. So I'm going to put it into views shared instead of views home. So I'll right-click on this. Remember that the subfolder here needs to be a specific name, which is components. And then the subfolder of that needs to be the name of the view component. And keep in mind that the name of the view component is not dogs view component. It's dogs less the view component suffix. So I just need a dogs folder here. Okay, and then I right-click on this once again. I need to add, and I'll select new item. And in this case, I need an MVC view page because this is the same template that you use for a full view that's used with an action method from a controller. All right, I'm going to use the default convention and name it default. That way I don't have to provide the name when I invoke the view. And I'll add that. And there's my view. In this case, I don't need any of this stuff. This is a very simple view, so it's not going to do anything complex. And now I want to add the content. In this case, I'm just going to keep it really simple. I'm also going to be somewhat, use a bit of a cliche here, and just say hello world. And I'll even capitalize it right, just for fun. Okay, so this is just to allow us to see that in fact, we are getting text from the view component. Okay, so we have the view component, we have the view, we're invoking the view from the view component when this method executes. The last thing we need to do is actually use the view component someplace. So for that, I'm going to come over here to the index view of the home controller. I'm going to get rid of all this cruft that Microsoft puts in the index view there. Come back up here. I'm going to leave the title so we still get home page, or leave the code at the top of the file there. But here is where I need to invoke that view component. So I'm going to use await and then component, and then use the invoke async method of that property of the view. And I want to use the dogs view component. Once again, that it needs to be the name of the view component, which drops the view component suffix. Okay, save early and save often. I'm going to rebuild before I run it just to make absolutely sure. I think I've embarrassed myself enough here. Looks good. Sync method okay, that's that same warning that I talked about earlier. All right, I can run the application. All right, and there we get the index view, and you can see that we have our hello world text. So we have a fully functional view component. All the pieces are in place. It's not using any of our dog data yet, but all of the pieces are in place for that view component. So this, you may want to do something like this the first time that you're adding a view component. Keep it simple, take it step by step. Just put out static text and just make sure everything is working. Okay. Now, one more thing I want to do, stop the application, is just explore a couple features of the view component. So the first thing I want to do is just change the name of the component to dogs, and I could come up here and use the view component attribute. And then this will identify it as a view component, and I don't need to use the dogs view component as the name of the class. And this is going to work just fine. We'll get the exact same result as before. Another thing I can do is I can change the name of the class to something silly like Floyd, or maybe something more meaningful to the application. But if I still want to use dogs as the name of the view component, I can use the name property here and set that equal to dogs. And now I'll have the exact same, whoops, I need the closing parentheses there. And now I'll get the exact same result because it's going to see that the name of the view component that I want to use throughout the application is dogs. All right, and then of course the third option I could do is to delete view component, but I'm not going to do that because the view method here is implemented by view component, and that would break the code. I would have to do something different in here, and it would eliminate all the different features of using the view component class. Okay, so just a little bit more about how you can modify the view component. So I'm going to restore all this back to its pristine state. And we'll use those conventions. A little bit of overkill to use the suffix there, but makes it very clear what's going on. All right, so that's our minimal view component. Let's do better, and let's do something with dogs here. Always fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is give myself some space. And the first thing that I need to do is I'm going to use the iDog service. So I need a place to put that, so I'm going to do a private variable. Let's see, I am within the method I need to be. Didn't go up quite far enough. Here we go. And it's an iDog service. I'll spell it right. And I'm going to call that underscore service. Once again, I need to add the using statement. I'll be lazy and use quick actions for that. And then I need the constructor because I need to have a place where I pull in that dog context object using dependency injection. So I need a public constructor. It's called dogs view component. And I'm going to bring in the iDog service, and I'll call that service. And here within the body of that, I just need to assign that service to the field. Okay, so now that makes it available to multiple methods within the class. I'm just going to have one, but that works here. And what am I doing here? Dogs view component, accessibility, iDog service is less accessible than method. Okay, so what this means is that I forgot to register the dog service within the startup class. So let's do that. So I'll come over here to startup. And here within configurations, I need to do services, add transient, use iDog service, and the concrete class that I want to use is dog service. Okay. So now if we come back over to the view component here, that should take care of that. Let me go ahead and build just to see if anything's not caught up there. Less accessible than the method. Okay. So let's see, what have I done wrong? All right, so something is still wrong and parameter type is less accessible. I bet I know exactly what it is. I didn't put public on the interface. And And I didn't. Okay. Save that change, come back over to view component. Should pick it up, but I'll explain. Okay, there we go. Okay, so again, what was happening with that error is that the interface was not as visible as the dog's view component, which means that it wasn't always going to be accessible or usable within the context where dog's view component could be used. Okay, so quick fix, but one of those error messages that tells you what's wrong, but doesn't immediately tell you what the issue was. Okay, took care of that. So let's now flesh out our invoke async method here. Okay, so now what I need to do is change the invoke async method in order to do what this view component needs. So the first thing I actually need to do is add that parameter. So it's a nullable boolean called over the bridge. And then I need to execute the entity framework statement in order to get the dogs. So I'm going to do var dogs. And here's where I use that await. So I'm hooking into the asynchronous system. And I'm going to use the service and get dogs, which is that method that we defined. And I'm just going to pass in over the bridge. All right, so because we defined that service, that's really all I need to do. I'm just going to pass in the value of that variable, and that getDogs method knows what to do with that. So if I come back over here, it knows that tracking as queryable, it checks to see the nullable, it does that if it's not null, and then returns that. So what's really nice about this code, by encapsulating it here in the dog service, it makes my code within the view component almost brain dead simple. Okay, I got carried away and added too many lines. But now what I need to do is pass this in as the model to the view. So again, if you're familiar with MVC controllers, that code just looks very familiar because you're passing the model to the view that's associated with this view component that's in components/dogs and is called default. So you can start to see how all the pieces come together. And note that dog's view component now has a dependency on iDog service. So this is using a dependency injection, and because we registered it in startup, hopefully correctly when we compile and run it, this is going to the correct class, concrete class, will be used by this dog's view component. Okay, next thing we need to do is modify the default.cshtml. We'll get rid of the static text here. And just real simple code, I'm just going to have an unordered list. And I'm going to go through and for each of the dogs, I'll grab each of those dog items within the dog variable, and that'll be in the model. And then I'm just going to have a line item and print out the dog's name. And save that. Okay, so now we have the view. It knows what to do with that collection of dogs. I'll save everything. And then the last thing I need to do is update the index view again. Because now, rather than just invoking this, I'm going to do something a little bit more complex. So one thing is I'm going to hook into the bootstrap that by default is the CSS behind new ASP.NET Core applications. You don't need to use it. Rip it out. You can use any CSS that you want, as well as less and Sass and those sorts of CSS tools. Okay, so I'm going to create a div here, and I'm going to give it a class of row. And notice that I get IntelliSense there, which is always really nice. And if you've done anything with Bootstrap, you know that I've now created a row that is essentially a logical division of the page. And then I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to give that, another div, and give that the class call MD4. Has to sum to 12 on a row. under most circumstances. And so here is where I'm going to use one of the view components for the first time. So I'll use an h4 header, and then I'll use await component, invoke async component, there we go, and just pass in dogs. Okay, guess I could have copy and pasted that, so let me get rid of this. So this one is going to show all of our dogs. All right, I'm going to use that same thing 2 more times on the same page. You can use the same view component on multiple pages. And here what I'm going to do is add a second parameter. So this is going to display, oops, got a little carried away. Actually, don't want that as the H4. I want that down here because I want to label these. That's what the H4 is for. Okay, that looks more like it. So I'll copy that, get rid of all of those, and then come back up here. And for this one, I'm going to say current dogs. And to do that, I need to add a second parameter to pass in an anonymous object. And I need to pass in a value for that over the bridge parameter. Okay, oops, need to spell it right. That matters less. Okay, so I'm setting that one equal to false, so I don't want to include in this list the dogs that are over the bridge. And I'll use it a third time. And here I'll set this to true and change the caption to over the bridge. And I'll save. Okay, hopefully I did all that correct. If I did, it looks okay. And now that should be everything, I hope. So being the paranoid type, I'll go ahead and rebuild the solution just to make absolutely sure. Goes out, restores any packages that are missing. Shouldn't be any in the short time we've been working with the project. All right, it compiles, always a good sign, and I'll run it, and that'll load the index view. And there we have our index view that lists all of our dogs. So that's the complete list there on the left. Our current dogs, as I mentioned, we have just 11 with us anymore, and the ones that are over the bridge. So that must be roughly 30. Kind of amazing over the years. All right, so we've successfully built a view component that uses a service, that uses Entity Framework Core, and all of the pieces have come together, and we were able to explore a number of features of ASP.NET Core applications and pull it all together.